The siren was still echoing when I slammed him against the wet hood, my hand firm on the cuffs, my heart pounding like it wanted to tear through the vest. Heavy rain fell. Mercury lamps flickered along the narrow street, neighbors peeking through cracks in their windows. The guy fought back, spat curses, twisted his body trying to break free, but I had won worse fights. At least that's what I thought, until the frayed sleeve of his jacket tore open and revealed a piece of marked skin. Lightning split the sky. I froze. It was the same tattoo, a crooked street parlor ink, a half moon cut by a line, 3 dots beneath it, the very mark of my missing brother. The thug noticed my silence, smirked with half his mouth, and whispered as if he knew me. "You've been looking for a long time, haven't you?" The world shrank to that obscure drawing. The rain, my name stuck in my throat. Should I let him go? Tighten the cuffs? Call for backup? He twisted his wrist, pushing the tattoo into my line of sight, and added, almost in an intimate whisper, "If you take this off me, you'll erase the only clue left." The siren went dead. I drew a deep breath and pulled out the blade of my pocket knife. I was born and raised in a neighborhood on the east side of São Paulo, in the middle of narrow streets filled with stories that never left the alleys. Since I was a kid, I learned to recognize the sound of a motorcycle racing the wrong way, the difference between a window slamming in the wind and a gate being forced open in the dead of night. My father worked as a doorman his whole life, a simple man who taught me to respect every neighbor, but also showed me, without ever using the right words, that justice didn't always arrive on its own. You had to chase it. My mother, a housekeeper, came home exhausted every day, but she still found the strength to remind me and my brother to study, to stay clear of the paths so many of our friends had already taken. From her, I learned that discipline and love can walk side by side even when there's barely enough money to put food on the table. When I was 18, my brother disappeared. It was as if the ground had opened beneath my family's feet. He left home one Friday night, saying he was going to meet some friends, and never came back. No body, no concrete leads, just cruel rumors and a strange tattoo that some swore they had seen on a group of boys mixed up in bad things. My father fell silent for months, as if he'd lost his voice along with his son. My mother grew sick from waiting. And me? I decided I wasn't going to be just another man powerless before fate. That was when my desire to become a police officer was born. Not out of some cheap heroism or from American movies I secretly watched on late-night TV, but out of the need to never again live at the mercy of uncertainty. I swore that if I couldn't save my brother, I would save others. I swore that if justice hadn't come for us, I would be the arm that brought it to families drowning in the same darkness. I passed the exam through almost superhuman effort, working as a supermarket security guard by day and studying with worn-out prep books late at night. By the time I joined the force, I was already hardened by loss, already shaped by a grief that had never ended. Over time, I became a specialist at spotting signs others overlooked, maybe because I was always hunting for traces of a past that never closed. At every call, every suspect I cuffed, I carried my brother's shadow. The uniform never gave me blind pride. Instead, it gave me weight. The weight of deciding who lives and who dies in split seconds, of knowing each shot can mark a family forever. I've lost colleagues in ambushes. I've seen children's bodies riddled by stray bullets. I've had to hold mothers as they crumbled identifying their children at a crime scene. These scars don't show up on X-rays, but they haunt me with every breath. My greatest conflict has always been this: how to keep my heart human in a world that demands coldness, how not to become just another cog, indifferent, when every face reminds me of my brothers. I walk that tightrope every day, torn between being the officer who protects and the man who still searches for answers. And deep down, in every crude tattoo, in every lost look of a detainee, I keep searching for him. That is what drives me, but also what destroys me. Because every time I think of stopping, I remember that maybe the next call, the next arrest, The next rainy night might finally bring the missing piece of this puzzle. And that's exactly what happened in that soaked alley. When the suspect's sleeve tore and the tattoo came into view, I realized the past I thought buried was still alive. And for the first time in years, I felt fear. Not of what could happen to me, but of what I might discover. It was a Friday under a heavy sky, stifling, the kind that makes the whole city breathe with difficulty, as if even the concrete were tired. I was at the end of my shift when the radio crackled with that urgency that changes the rhythm of your heartbeat. The operator's voice came cut by static, but clear enough to freeze the air inside the patrol car. An anonymous tip reporting an armed robbery in progress at an abandoned auto shop on the east side, an area known as a meeting point for small crews of thieves who had been growing bolder in their hits. The call came with a warning. Suspects were reportedly heavily armed and had been using the location as a hideout for weeks. For some, it might sound like just another call, but for me, nothing is just another call. Every dispatch has its own smell, its own breath, carrying the invisible weight of something that can change lives in seconds. As I turned the key and felt the growl of the engine under my hands, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't pure fear. It was that kind of premonition only someone who's seen the unexpected up close can understand. The address rang a bell. Narrow streets, a dark alley I had already walked years ago during one of my desperate searches for my missing brother. The coincidence hit me like a punch, but I swallowed hard and focused on the present. I was a cop, and my duty was to respond. The radio kept spitting out fragmented details. Neighbors had reported strange activity, lights flickering inside the shop, and at least 3 armed men moving around outside. No confirmed hostages, but the risk was clear. Command ordered caution, backup en route. But I knew in that area minutes could mean suspects slipping away or a tragedy plastered on tomorrow's headlines. I looked at my partner in the passenger seat, but his eyes only mirrored the same mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. Neither of us had to say a word. We were already going. The siren tore through the suffocating night, cutting across the distant noise of the city. With every corner we turned, more memories came flooding back. The same route, the same alleys where I once plastered missing posters with my brother's face. It felt as though fate was dragging me back, stitching the past to the present. I gripped the steering wheel tight, forcing myself not to get distracted. My cop's mind had to stay sharp, cold, calculating. But the man inside me already felt his pulse racing faster than it should. We killed the siren a block from the address. The city there seemed suspended, too silent. Wind carried plastic bags across wet asphalt, and a dog barked far away. I parked the patrol car 1 block out and studied the abandoned building. Broken windows leaked out trembling beams of light from inside, as if candles burned in secret. Something was off. Petty thieves don't light up their hideouts, not when they know they risk drawing attention. It was as if they wanted to be noticed, as if there was a hidden message in that setup. As I tightened my vest and checked my weapon, the radio crackled again. Back up 10 minutes out. 10 minutes could be an eternity. I breathed deep, staring at that dead building that seemed to hold too many ghosts. My skin crawled, not just from the risk of an armed confrontation, but from the unsettling sense that this place was tied to me, that some invisible thread was pulling my destiny inside those walls. And it was right then, balanced between duty and the restless ache that never left me, that I chose to move in. The official call was simple: armed suspects in a meeting point. But deep down, I already knew this wouldn't be just another line in a midnight report. Something was waiting for me behind those iron doors. Something not written in the dispatcher's log, something that was about to unravel every certainty I still held. And somehow, without knowing why, I felt my grip tighten on the gun, not just as a tool of my trade, but as the only anchor holding me back from a tide of memories ready to swallow me whole. The narrow street felt like a corridor of shadows when I parked the patrol car a few meters from the abandoned auto shop. With the engine off, a heavy silence settled, broken only by the distant pop of a transformer and the steady drip of rainwater from gutters. The air smelled of rusted iron and burnt oil, mixed with the dampness that clung to every brick of that forgotten place. I stepped out slowly, adjusting my vest, my boots sinking into puddles that reflected the weak yellow glow of the street lamps. The building in front of me was nothing but an urban skeleton, a rusted iron, gate, shattered windows, walls covered in graffiti that looked more like desperate screams left by invisible people. Across the street, two humble houses had their windows sealed shut, curtains drawn thick. The people inside were awake, I was sure, but they wouldn't risk looking out. It was the unwritten law of the neighborhood. See without testifying, hear without repeating. That absence of movement only sharpened the feeling that I was stepping into a place where time itself worked differently. Every step I took seemed to echo too loud. Every breath felt like it risked giving me away. I edged closer to the gate. The faded paint still held traces of a once blue color, now corroded by rust. I pressed my ear against it and listened. Muffled voices carried from inside, 2, maybe 3, arguing in harsh, low tones. I couldn't make out words, only the aggressive rhythm of the exchange. Then a metallic scrape reverberated through the space, someone dragging something heavy across the concrete floor. That detail struck me. Petty thieves hiding out don't make that much noise. It was almost theatrical, as if they wanted to be heard, to lure someone in. The lighting inside unsettled me too. Through the cracks of the broken windows, a flickering yellow light spilled out in shaky beams, the kind that could be candles or makeshift wiring strung dangerously. It bothered me. No gang I knew would risk visibility like that in such a watched neighborhood. Another sign that this was more than it seemed. Examining the gate, I noticed fresh scratches on the iron, marks from frequent use. On the ground lay damp cigarette butts and a crushed energy drink can, clear evidence the place had been in regular use. Then I saw something that stuck in my mind. Footprints in the greasy puddles, fresh ones. Some large, some smaller, suggesting at least 3 or 4 people moving around. One print dragged slightly on the left foot, leaving a distorted trail. A detail like that stays with a cop like a secret code. It could be the clue to identifying someone later. My partner signaled silently for us to check the side alley. The passage was even narrower, high walls pressing in on both sides, reeking of mold and garbage. At the end, a rotted wooden door seemed to serve as a secondary exit. Then, a sudden clatter. Bottles crashing to the ground on the other side. My pulse spiked. There was more movement than the report suggested. Maybe a lookout, maybe someone preparing to bolt. That's when a strange familiarity crept over me. This place, this shop, it wasn't new to me. I had been here years earlier, one of the countless places I'd searched during the desperate hunt for my brother. Back then it was dead, just rats scurrying through rusted machines. Now, seeing it alive again, buzzing with criminal activity, gave me the bitter taste of déjà vu. It was as if fate had dragged me in circles, forcing me to revisit pain I thought I'd buried. My first impression was crystal clear. This wasn't just a routine call. It reeked of a setup, of a larger plot hiding behind the facade of common thieves. Nothing lined up. The lights, the voices, the noise, all too obvious for criminals who should be hiding. It felt staged, like a play designed to draw someone in, maybe me. And standing there between the smell of rust, the complicit silence of the houses, and the pounding in my chest, I realized that stepping through that gate wasn't just walking into another operation. It was stepping into my own past, into a space where the line between officer and brother searching for answers was about to vanish. I pushed the gate open slowly, the rusty metal groaning far too loud for the silence of the street. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of my choice. There was no turning back. My heart pounded in sync with the metallic scrape, as if every beat were etched into iron. Inside, the air swallowed me in thick gloom, the smell of old grease mixed with human sweat, as if the place itself were breathing with me. My flashlight's weak beam sliced through the darkness, revealing scraps of abandoned machinery, piles of tires, rusted tools scattered like skeletons of old battles. But what gripped me was the sudden silence. The voices I had heard outside stopped all at once, as if the men already knew we were there. I signaled to my partner, who moved along the side, weapon drawn. Our boots echoed against the concrete, giving us away more than any siren could. The tension felt physical, pressing down on my shoulders. Then, out of nowhere, a metallic crash. A chain dropped to the floor in the back of the warehouse. A shadow bolted through the far corner. I reacted on instinct, raising my gun and shouting, "Police! Down on the ground!" But the figure didn't obey. The pounding of sneakers against cement echoed like invisible gunfire, and adrenaline surged hot in my blood. We chased him, weaving through shattered machines, lungs burning. He slipped behind an old car, and I heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. I rolled aside just as a shot rang out, the bullet sparking against metal inches from me. The sharp scent of gunpowder filled the air, dust rising from the floor. My partner fired back twice, bullets thudding into the car's shell, forcing the suspect to duck. The confrontation had begun. Then movement. More figures emerged from the shadows, 2 of them. One wielded a machete, the other clutching an iron rod. In seconds, the scene transformed from a quiet entry into a battlefield. Screams, metal clanging against the floor, glass shattering as a bottle was knocked over. Chaos rose like a symphony. The armed suspect ducked back, and the weak light caught his face. Young, with fresh tattoos, eyes bloodshot with rage and adrenaline. But what froze me wasn't his face. It was his arm. The ink blurred in the dim light, but I recognized the shape. A half-moon cut by a line, 3 dots beneath. My stomach lurched. I couldn't be. Sure, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. The past screamed at me, but there was no time to think. My partner rushed the man with the machete, while I squared off against the one with the iron rod. He swung wildly. The blow slammed into my vest, knocking the air from my lungs. I countered with the butt of my pistol, sending him crashing to the ground, groaning but conscious. The gunman saw it, fired again. The bullet tore past my ear, a whistle of steel that nearly ended me. I fired, back, hitting his leg. His scream cut through the warehouse, a raw blend of fury and pain. But silence never came. From the upper floor came footsteps pounding across rotten wooden boards. More of them. I glanced up just in time to see a silhouette darting toward a shattered window. I lunged for the staircase, its rusty steps shrieking under my weight. But before I could reach him, a voice froze me in place. "You shouldn't be here." I spun, weapon raised. But it wasn't one of the fleeing suspects. It was the man with the bullet in his leg, blood pooling fast, and yet his grin held steady. His words slithered into me like poison. The reinforcement hadn't arrived, and the warehouse seemed to be spawning enemies from every corner. The action surged like a rising tide, and I felt myself at the razor's edge, fighting not just to keep control, but against the looming sense that this wasn't just a firefight. This was a trap designed for me. Sweat poured down my face, mixing with dust, every muscle screaming to hold on. But beneath it all, a brutal certainty settled in my chest. This wasn't a random bust. This was a door, wide open, into the labyrinth of my past. And once I crossed, there would be no way back. The wounded man's scream still echoed as I climbed the stairs toward the upper floor. The rusted handrail groaned under my grip, every step threatening to collapse, my pulse hammering louder than my boots on the metal. My lungs burned, and the air seemed thicker up there, choked with dust, and the lingering stench of cigarettes and gunpowder. The corridor was narrow, lined with broken doors that opened into old offices, abandoned long ago. The smell of mold clung to the walls, mixing with sweat and something metallic. Blood, maybe. I kicked open the first door, empty, just piles of old tires, dry paint cans, shadows. But the second door stood half open. I steadied my breathing, pushed it with the tip of my boot. Inside, a figure crouched in the corner, reaching for something under a desk. My gun snapped up. I shouted for him to freeze. The man hesitated, but what stopped him wasn't my command. It was the beam of my flashlight cutting across his arm. The tattoo, clear, carved into his skin like a brand. The half-moon split by a line, 3 dots beneath. The same image I'd carried in my mind for years. The same whispered mark tied to my brother's disappearance. For a moment, my whole world collapsed inward. My stomach twisted, and the buzzing in, my ears drowned out everything else. The man raised his hand slowly, as if sensing the power that tattoo held over me. Then he spoke. His voice was raspy, but there was a strange familiarity in its tone, a resonance that rattled me. Not my brother's voice, but it carried something of him, as if shaped by the same streets, the same nights we grew up under. "Don't shoot. You don't know who I am." The words sliced deep. My weapon didn't waver, but my resolve did. I demanded to know where he got that tattoo. He smirked even through his pain and said, "It's not just a mark, it's a seal. If you carry it, you belong, and you only get it if there's blood tying you to it." A wave of memories crashed into me. My brother laughing in our backyard, always hiding his arm under a long sleeve. Nights when he came home late, smelling of cheap cigarettes, eyes heavy with secrets. Could it be possible? Had he already borne this mark before disappearing? Or was this some criminal brotherhood that had swallowed him whole? The suspect leaned forward, eyes locked on mine, his voice low, sharp. "You're closer than you think. If you want answers about your brother, you need to get me out of here alive." My knees nearly buckled. He shouldn't have known about my brother. I never spoke of him on duty, never mentioned him in reports. And yet this stranger had pierced straight through to the wound I'd buried under years of steel and silence. Behind me, my partner's boots pounded up the stairs. He asked what the situation was, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't even breathe right. The suspect's gaze stayed locked on mine, unblinking, as he whispered, "He didn't just vanish, and this tattoo proves it. You know that." My grip tightened around the gun, sweat slicking my palms. For the first time in my career, the weapon felt useless, a piece of dead weight. The manual said cuff him, process him, file the report, but this wasn't a suspect anymore. He was a key, a living fragment of the puzzle. I'd been chasing since I was 18, and he had just revealed himself, not with violence, but with the kind of truth that destroys everything you thought you knew. The revelation wasn't just shocking, it was devastating. Because from that moment on, I knew the boundary between my badge and my bloodline had been shattered forever. And whether I wanted it or not, I was about to plunge into a world where finding my brother might mean losing myself. I stood there frozen, gun aimed at him, but my mind plunging into an endless abyss. My whole career had balanced on a fragile line between discipline and humanity. The badge taught me that the law is clear, that action must be swift, and that hesitation can cost lives. But the man before me carried the tattoo that had haunted me for years, the mark I tied to my brother's disappearance, the scar that had turned my life into a constant search for answers. And now, as a cop, I had to act with cold precision. As a brother, I wanted to scream, to rip the truth out of him, even if it tore me apart inside. The conflict split me in two. Part of me wanted to follow protocol, cuff him, drag him to the precinct, write up a sterile report. It would be the right choice, the one that kept my career intact, the one that showed my partner I wasn't weak, that I didn't let my heart get in the way. But another part, older, rawer, carved into me since that night of loss, was louder. It was the voice of my family, who never had a body to bury, my mother, who wasted away waiting, my father who died in silence, burdened with guilt for not protecting his youngest son. That voice told me this was it, that this moment could not be wasted on bureaucracy, that the chance to finally understand what happened to my brother was right here, alive, staring at me with a crooked, taunting grin. My arm trembled, not from fear, but from rage and desperate hope tangled together, two emotions that should never coexist. I looked at his face, and something gnawed at me. He wasn't just a criminal. He carried features that reminded me of my brother, the sharp jaw, the sunken eyes, the way his mouth curved when he spoke. I knew it could be my exhausted mind playing tricks, projecting what I wanted to see, but it consumed me as if it were real. And worse, he seemed to know. Every word out of his mouth felt like bait, pulling me into a pit where right and wrong no longer had shape. Behind me, my partner called again. "What's the situation? Everything under control?" But nothing was under control. I didn't dare answer because anything I said would reveal the storm tearing me apart. It was like my body stood in that office, but my soul had been dragged back to the night my brother walked out and never returned. I relived my mother's cooking with one empty plate at the table, the nights knocking on precinct doors, begging for news. And now this stranger bleeding before me seemed to hold all the answers. I closed my eyes for a second and asked myself, how far am I willing to go? I was sworn to serve, sworn to protect, but I was also a man broken by unfinished grief. If I chose the law, I risked losing the truth forever. If I chose blood, I risked losing my badge, my future, myself. And the question cut like glass. What matters more, justice for all or justice for my brother? I felt his breath quicken, like he could sense my hesitation. He knew he had struck where I was weakest, and maybe that was his plan all along, to turn my past into his weapon. I knew one thing for certain. Cops aren't supposed to have vulnerabilities, but I did, and they were wide open. My fingers slick with sweat on the trigger, my mind screamed in opposite directions. One side, finish this now, do your job. The other, don't let this chance slip through your fingers. The clash inside me was louder than gunfire, and in that crushing silence I realized a bitter truth. No academy, no manual, no training could have prepared me for this, because this wasn't about law or order. It was about me, about who I was once the badge was stripped away and only a brother remained. And there, staring into that defiant gaze, I knew whichever choice I made would scar me forever. The question was no longer whether to arrest him or not. The question was whether I could still be a cop, or if, from this moment on, I would be nothing but a brother obsessed, willing to cross any line to bring my sibling back from the shadows. Sweat ran down my face, burning like acid, and the gun felt heavier than it ever had in my hand. The suspect bleeding in front of me didn't look afraid of dying. On the contrary, every second that ticked by, every glance he threw at me, carried the same silent provocation, as if daring me to admit I didn't have the guts to do what really needed to be done. Behind me, my partner was still waiting for an answer, not realizing that I was standing at a crossroads that had nothing to do with police procedure. I was alone in that dilemma, split between the badge and blood, between the law I had sworn to uphold and the brother I had sworn never to abandon. I closed my eyes for a moment and heard my mother's voice, faint but sharp in memory. Promise me you'll take care of your brother. A promise I never fulfilled, because he vanished before I ever had the chance. And here I was, years later, facing a man branded with the same mark, insinuating that he knew exactly what had happened to him. My whole life felt like it had been. Leading to this point, each step carefully arranged to force me to choose between protocol and tearing down every rule in search of the truth. My breathing grew shallow, each lungful of air cutting like glass. Logic told me to cuff him, call backup, document everything, let the system run its course. But I knew that system too well. Slow, flawed, full of holes. If he was processed, how long before lawyers swooped in? Before connections buried his testimony? Before the answers slipped back into the shadows forever? The law had its paths, but I knew those paths often closed doors that never opened again. Rage pushed me forward. I wanted to grab him by the collar, press the barrel to his temple, force the truth out of him right there. But the cop in me pulled back, whispering, "If you cross that line, you can never return." Maybe that was the real choice. To remain the officer who still clung to a shred of humanity, or admit that my life no longer belonged to the force but to the obsession of finding my brother. I stared into his eyes. There was no fear, only knowledge. A man who knew exactly what he was doing, as if every move had been calculated to drag me into this moment. His lips curled as he said, "You've got 10 seconds to decide." Get me out of here or you'll never learn what happened to him." His arrogance cut deep. He wasn't bluffing. He was in control, and that filled me with fury. I stepped closer, the gun just inches from his face. My partner shouted my name, confused, but I barely heard it over the pounding of my heart. In that split second, I saw my life split into two roads. On one side, the law, order, discipline. On the other, truth, dark, uncertain, but carrying the only real chance of ending the torment that had consumed me for years. And then I chose. With a shaky breath, I holstered my gun, grabbed him by the arm, yanked him to his feet, and whispered into his ear, low enough for only him to hear, "You're coming out of here with me. But if you lie to me once, I'll finish it myself." My partner froze, wide-eyed, unable to tell if I was bluffing or if I had truly stepped off the edge. The truth was, I already knew. I wasn't just a cop anymore. I was a brother, and this decision, so small in the chaos of the night, was actually the point of no return. Because from now on, I was willing to lose everything. My badge, my career, my future. All of it, if it meant finally finding my brother. As I dragged him out of the warehouse, his blood soaking into my vest, I realized I had just signed a pact. Not with the law, not with the force, but with my own destiny. And there would be no turning back. Dragging that wounded man out of the warehouse, the night shifted as if someone had flipped a page. The moment the door slammed behind us, the stench of oil and gunpowder gave way to the cold wind of the street, and with it came the sharp electricity of consequence. My choice was no longer a thought. It was real, alive, already carving scars around me. My partner stood frozen for a second, caught between admiration and fear. He had seen me cross a line, and the tension between us was thick, almost visible, like a crack widening in the concrete beneath our feet. The radio on his belt crackled, the voice of command sharp and demanding, "Report your status." Formal, urgent, unforgiving. My partner raised the mic, stumbled for words, his eyes darting to me, begging for direction. I told him, steady but low, to stick to the basics. Suspects down, scene contained, backup required. He did as I said, but hesitation clung to his voice, a hesitation that would be remembered. As we waited for reinforcement, the man groaned in the back of the patrol car, muttering in half-whispers, fragments about the seal and the order, each word lodged like a splinter under my skin. I leaned over him, improvising bandages with trembling hands, while my partner called for an ambulance and crime scene investigators. I asked him to keep his report clean, to leave out certain details, that I had pulled the suspect from the scene alive, that I had bent the chain of procedure. He didn't reply, but the silence was enough. That doubt would stay between us, gnawing. The blue lights arrived, painting the street in strobe flashes. Fellow officers poured in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Some knew me as the by-the-book cop, serious, reliable. Others whispered already, wondering if I had gone too far. A sergeant stepped up, stern eyes cutting into me, demanding details. I laid out the sanitized version. Armed resistance, shots exchanged, arrest made. His face betrayed nothing, but I felt his gaze probing for cracks. Forensics took over the warehouse. Cameras flashed, evidence bagged, footprints photographed, blood scraped from the floor. The tattoo, the mark that had been haunting me, was recorded, cataloged, filed. Part of me wanted to scream, to claim it for what it was. Proof, a thread to my brother. But I knew if I said too much, if I tied my personal history to this, the whole case would unravel in the hands of lawyers and bureaucracy. The system I had sworn to uphold was now the very thing I feared would bury the truth. Meanwhile, the human consequences grew heavier. My partner's silence cut deeper than any bullet. He didn't look at me the same way. He didn't need to say it out loud. I could feel the fracture. Loyalty and suspicion lived side by side in his stare. Around us, the murmurs of the other officers spread, little seeds of doubt that would bloom into reports, questions, investigations. Already the messages buzzed on my phone. Preliminary report. Send body cam footage. This case is under review. The word internal affairs wasn't said yet, but I could hear it waiting in the shadows. And still, Inside me, the consequences took a darker form. I wasn't thinking of protocols, of my record, of what I might lose. I was thinking only of my brother. The moment the suspect whispered that childhood nickname, the one no one else could know, he had bound me to this path. No court, no supervisor, no chain of custody could compete with that. By the time the suspect was loaded into an ambulance, escorted by officers, I knew the truth. The operation was over for the department, but for me, it had only just begun. I felt it like a verdict hanging in the air. I had chosen to gamble my badge, my career, and maybe my freedom for the chance at answers. As I stood under the harsh, blue strobe of the patrol lights, the city waking in the distance, I realized the immediate consequences weren't just paperwork or suspicion. They were personal. Trust was broken. Shadows lengthened around my name. And yet, beneath the weight of all that, one thought burned brighter than fear. If he knew that nickname, then my brother was out there, alive, and no consequence, no matter how severe, was going to stop me from finding him. In the back seat of the patrol car, the man's breathing was ragged, his blood soaking the torn fabric of his pants. My partner kept his eyes on me through the rearview mirror, torn between loyalty and the urge to call me out. The radio kept spitting commands from headquarters, demanding updates, but in that moment, I shut the outside world off. I pulled the car into a deserted street, the kind where the lampposts flickered weakly and the night itself seemed to be holding its breath. It was time to hear what this man had to say, whatever the cost. I yanked, opened the back door, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the cold metal of the car. The chill of the steel clashed with the heat of his blood, and he let out a guttural groan. Still, his eyes stayed locked on mine, steady, defiant. "Do you know what this tattoo means?" I growled. He didn't flinch. "It means your brother is still alive." The words struck like lightning, splitting everything inside me. For a second, my heart stopped, and the air felt too thin to breathe. I searched his face for any sign of deceit, but all I found was conviction. He was battered, bleeding, yet the corner of his mouth twisted upward with the arrogance of someone who held the upper hand. "He didn't just disappear," he continued. "He was chosen, just like me. The seal isn't for everyone. You only carry it if blood ties you to it." My legs almost gave way. Nobody had ever dared to say my brother's name, much less speak of him as if he were still out there. And now this man bled out in my custody, feeding me a poison that tasted like hope. My partner stepped closer, asking what he'd said. I couldn't repeat it. I couldn't let the words escape again, as if saying them twice might break the fragile possibility they carried. The suspect leaned forward, his voice low and cutting. "If you take me in, they'll silence me before I ever talk. But if you keep me alive, I'll take you to him." It was blackmail, a trap. I knew it. Cops get manipulated all the time, and hope is the sharpest blade a criminal can wield. And yet, no one else had ever given me something this concrete. Not until now. My partner urged me to call the ambulance to do my job. I hesitated. The seconds stretched thin, every tick a reminder that this man might not make it. And then he dropped the final blow. "He doesn't go by his old name anymore. They gave him another, but I know how he still calls you. The nickname only you two used." My blood froze. That word, our secret name from childhood, whispered under the covers, shouted in the backyard when no one else was around. It tumbled out of his mouth with the weight of a confession. It wasn't something he could have invented, not something anyone else could have known. My partner looked at me, bewildered, but I couldn't tear my eyes off the man. The truth was in his smirk, in his pain, in the way his words hit like a hammer to the chest. For the first time in years, someone had cracked open the silence. Right there, in the pale glow of failing streetlights, I understood that this wasn't just another arrest. It was the beginning of a path that would consume me. This wasn't about one more suspect, one more report. This was about my brother. And that conversation, whispered through blood and defiance, didn't just change the case, it changed everything. Because now I knew he was alive, and nothing, law, badge, or consequence, was going to stop me from finding him. When I gripped the steering wheel again, with that man bleeding in the back seat and my partner sunk in heavy silence beside me, I realized something inside me had already shifted. For years, I had clung to the badge as armor against my grief, believing discipline and protocol were enough to keep my ghosts at bay. But it took just one night, a tattoo, and a few words dripping with venom to shatter it all. The truth was, I had never stopped being that boy who lost his brother. I had never stopped scanning every face behind bars in the hope of finding a trace of him. I had just learned how to hide that obsession behind reports and endless shifts. Now, though, that mask was gone. As the city slept, the wet streets glistening in the glow of the patrol lights, I felt a new burden settle on me, carrying not only the badge, but a vow whispered to myself, to go all the way no matter what. And that meant admitting I could no longer just be a cop. Maybe I would become something else, a hybrid of officer and brother, chasing leads through alleys the law might never reach. My mother's tired eyes came to mind, the last time she spoke of my brother's disappearance. My father's silence followed, a silence he carried to the grave, eaten alive by guilt. What would they say now, knowing I was willing to risk my career, maybe even my life, for a scrap of hope? Would they call me reckless, or thank me for never giving up? That question carved itself deep, unanswered, yet unavoidable. The suspect's words wouldn't leave me. "Your brother is still alive," a phrase. That could have been a manipulation, a ploy, but he had spoken the childhood nickname no outsider could ever know. That detail had cracked me open. For years, I had carried nothing but silence, and now I was carrying dangerous hope. That was when I saw the transformation for what it was. Until then, I had seen myself as a cop weighed down by trauma. Now I was a man whose trauma dictated every step of his career. The line that once separated my uniform from my personal history had vanished. Could no longer look at a suspect and see only crime statistics. From now on, every tattoo, every silence, every shiver of fear carried the possibility of being the clue that led me to him. But change comes with a price. I knew this would drag me into a world where my superiors couldn't follow. If I revealed too much, I'd be deemed unstable, compromised, pulled off duty. If I hid the truth, I risked crossing lines that could swallow me whole. Between those extremes, only one thing anchored me: the promise I had made as a child to always take care of my brother. That night forced me to see I had crossed a point of no return. I might still wear the uniform, still respond to calls, still fill out the paperwork, but inside, my mission had shifted. The police force was still my shield, but it was no longer my purpose. My purpose was truth. And in that tense silence, with the suspects breathing ragged behind me and my partner's judgment heavy in the air, I felt it settle like a revelation. My duty wasn't just to the city or to the badge, it was to the blood in my veins, to the ghosts that haunted me. It wasn't about serving and protecting anymore. It was about confronting fate, whatever it cost. And that transformation was final. I wasn't just a cop anymore. I was a brother on the hunt, and nothing, not law, not fear, not the shadows waiting ahead, could turn me back. The night dragged on longer than any I had ever known on duty. With the sirens switched off, the patrol car felt like a steel coffin cutting through the wet streets, carrying not just a bleeding suspect, but every unanswered question that had haunted me since youth. The radio kept spitting orders, status updates, reinforcements, instructions, but each clipped voice felt distant, like it belonged to another world. I answered mechanically, just enough to maintain the appearance of control, though inside I was teetering on the edge of collapse. We brought the man to the hospital under escort. The medical team rushed in, tearing through his clothes, shouting codes, the sharp smell of disinfectant replacing the stink of blood. I had seen this scene dozens of times before, bodies barely clinging to life, doctors working against the clock. But this wasn't just another criminal. He was the only living key to the riddle that had devoured my family. Every second he stayed alive was another second I could still hope. And yet every suspicious glance from my fellow officers reminded me that I had already stepped outside the line. Hours later in the precinct, the interrogation room felt colder than usual. The the flickering light overhead pulsing in time with my heart. The suspect, bandaged and pale, wore that same crooked smile that seemed to mock me. A senior officer entered, asked for the official account. I gave it. Anonymous tip, armed confrontation, resistance, arrest. My voice was steady, but inside, every syllable felt like a betrayal. I was protecting the part of the story that mattered most, the part that tied him to my brother. The hardest moment, however, wasn't with my superiors. It was facing my partner. He hadn't said a word since we left the warehouse, but silence can be louder than any accusation. In his eyes, I saw the fracture forming, between duty and loyalty, between trust and suspicion. He knew I was hiding something, and that knowledge sat between us like a loaded weapon. Official procedure rolled on like a machine. Forensics cataloged the tattoo. Photographs were taken. Digital prints entered the system. The suspect was booked, charges filed, chain of custody secured. The report I typed that night was sterile, stripped of feeling. But every word felt like a mask, hiding the truth I refused to share. I wasn't recording a case. I was burying a secret in plain sight. When I finally stepped outside, dawn was breaking weakly over the city. The streets were already filling with buses, horns, footsteps, as if life had simply resumed. But inside me, nothing was ordinary. I knew the department saw closure. Suspects apprehended, case processed, paperwork filed. For them, the operation was finished. For me, it had only just begun. That crooked tattoo, those whispered words, the childhood nickname, each one was gasoline on a fire I'd carried for years. I had more now than I ever did before. A lead, fragile and dangerous, but real. As I holstered my weapon and looked out at the gray horizon, the badge on my chest weighed differently. I was still a police officer, but the job was no longer my sole purpose. My mission had shifted. The city could keep its routines, my colleagues their reports. My life now had only one direction: find my brother, whatever the cost. On paper, the occurrence was closed. In my heart, it was the opening chapter of a hunt that would consume everything. The city woke as if nothing had happened, horns blaring, people rushing to work, the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting from bakeries. But for me, nothing was the same. On the surface, the case was closed. Reports filed, evidence logged, suspects processed. Officially, I was just another cop who had survived a dangerous operation. But inside, there was no closure, only a heavier void, laced with a dangerous flame of hope. All morning, the suspect's words replayed in my head. "Your brother is still alive." 4 words that wouldn't let me breathe. They could have been a manipulation, a calculated trick to keep himself alive, but then he had whispered the childhood nickname, the one no outsider could possibly know. That detail broke me open. It was too personal, too buried in memory, to be fabricated. And it left me with the one thing I hadn't felt in years, the possibility that he was still out there. In the locker room mirror, peeling off my vest and sweat-soaked uniform, I didn't see the same man anymore. I wasn't just the officer who followed orders, nor the son who carried his parents' grief. I was someone divided, half a servant of the law, half a brother consumed by obsession. Reports and arrests would no longer be enough. From now on, I would chase the clues, even if they led me into shadows where the law couldn't follow. But the harshest lesson wasn't about my brother. It was about myself. I realized pain can become a compass, but that compass doesn't always point true north. If I let my heart lead me blindly, I risked losing myself. If I let only the badge guide me, I risked becoming hollow. The balance was nearly impossible, but survival lived in that thin space between the two. This job had already taught me that every choice leaves scars. Some fade, others burn forever. That night, I made a choice to gamble everything on hope, and I know the consequences will come. Disciplinary boards, suspicion, maybe even disgrace. But I also know that neutrality doesn't exist when the past calls your name. Either you answer, or you live haunted by silence. If there's something to take from my story, it's this: we all carry ghosts. Some bury them, others pretend they don't exist, but sooner or later they knock on your door. And when they do, it won't matter what uniform you wear or what title you hold. You'll have to decide if you'll face them or let them define you. I chose to face mine, even if it cost me everything. That morning, as the city's rhythm swallowed the night, I understood my life had changed for good. And maybe the greatest lesson was this: no matter how far you go in search of answers, there will always be something inside yourself that needs to be rescued first. Before I could find my brother, I needed to find myself. And so I carry on, still wearing the badge, still answering calls, but now on a mission unwritten in any manual, etched only into the scars of my past. Because in the end, justice isn't just about catching criminals. It's about never abandoning those you love, even when the world has. If this story struck a chord with you, leave a comment about the part that hit hardest. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and share it so others can hear. Your voice keeps alive the confessions of those of us who walk every day on the thin line between law, truth, and the ghosts of the past.